Graham Hancock, it is amazing to have you here. I'm honored, completely honored to have you. It was great to get to know you last night at dinner along with Santha. You guys are super cool people, and it was a lot of fun. One of the most memorable dinners that I've had in a long time.
Well, thank you, and it was great to meet you and Crystal as well, and get to know you guys. And it's great to be here. Thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So you have recently launched Ancient Apocalypse 2.
Yes, that's right. It's a TV documentary series on Netflix. Ancient Apocalypse 1 was launched in November 2022, and for the last couple of years we've been making season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, and that was launched on the 16th of October. So it's available all over the world in multiple languages, and it's been a very controversial show. There's been a lot of pushback from archaeologists about it, which I expect and which is fair enough. But it has certainly proved interesting to audiences. There's been a big take up of the show all around the world, and that tells me that investigating the past and looking into mysteries in the past is something that resonates with a lot of people all around the world. And I think that one of the reasons why we have so many alternative views on the past, which differ from the views of archaeologists, is that archaeologists are not providing a fully satisfactory explanation for many of the anomalies and puzzles that we find in the past. So I'm taking viewers on a journey all around the world in a series of seasons of Ancient Apocalypse. And season 2 is focused almost entirely on the Americas. The only exception is Easter Island, and that is in a sense the Americas because it's Chile. It's part of Chile. It is also 2,000 miles from the west coast of South America and 2,000 miles from Tahiti. It's this tiny dot of an island in the middle of nowhere, very mysterious place. But otherwise, we focused on North America, on Mexico, and hugely on South America as well, particularly the Amazon rainforest.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, I binge watched it yesterday.
Oh, great.
So fully, I'm looking forward to diving into some of the aspects of that with you. How has this trip been for you so far in terms of like whirlwind podcasting, podcast after podcast?
I've been doing a lot of podcasts because I would like to get the word out as much as possible. There are people who follow archaeologists who seem to detest my work and dislike what I do, but there are a great many people who appreciate and are interested in my work. So I'd like to get the word out to those who are interested in my work, that there is a new season of Ancient Apocalypse out, and for that reason, I've been doing quite a few podcasts, including Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman and now you, and I'm going to be carrying on doing a few more. I'm primarily an author. That's what I do, and I'm probably best known for Fingerprints of the Gods, that was published in 1995. My 2 most recent books are Magicians of the Gods, which was published in 2015, and America Before, which was published in 2019. Since then, I've been focusing totally on the Ancient Apocalypse TV series for Netflix. But I'm coming to this point because back in the 90s, that's when I first started doing tours to promote books at that time. And I was in my 40s then, and I had the energy to do public talks in 20 cities and, do 20 radio shows in a row. And it's a bit different when you're in your mid-70s, which I am now. And I do find my energy is not as high as it was when I was in my 40s, and I guess that's to be expected. But I'm in reasonably good health, and I feel lucky to have this opportunity. I feel lucky to have this opportunity to reach out to audiences around the world and to speak on podcasts, to go into more detail on many of the subjects that I've covered over the last 30 years. I've spent 30 years of my life totally focused to looking into the possibility of some sort of lost civilization during the Ice Age. I feel there's major missing pieces of the puzzle, and it's those missing pieces that intrigue me. I did a debate on the Joe Rogan Experience back in April 2024 with an archaeologist called Flint Dibble. And his position is we archaeologists go from the known to the unknown. And that's quite the opposite of my position, which is I go from the unknown to the known. It's the unknown that I'm interested in. It's the stuff that archaeologists haven't yet properly nailed down. It's the mysteries that remain unexplained that I go on to. And while I'm on the subject of that debate, I would like to draw the attention of your viewers and listeners to a video that I uploaded to my YouTube channel just maybe around about the 15th or 16th of October. And that is called Fact Checking Science Communicator Flint Dibble. And in that, I go through a series of statements that Flint Dibble made during the debate, which I found quite baffling at the time, but turn out not to have been based on solid evidence, but rather spin upon the facts. So I thought it was important for those who follow my work to understand how archaeologists function. And I had gone into that expecting total transparency from the archaeologists I was dealing with. And that's certainly what I gave, was total transparency. But as I show in this video, total transparency from the archaeological side was not there. And it seemed to be more about winning a debate by any means. By
right.
any means possible,
Yeah.
rather than engaging in an intelligent and respectful conversation. It took me a long time to put this video up because I've been so busy with Ancient Apocalypse, but I did finally get it done just very recently, and it's up there on my YouTube channel, and I hope that people will take a look at it.
Mm-hmm. No, a lot of people have, and you can see it in the comments that people appreciate what you're doing and stand behind you, and yeah, it's just incredible.
Well, as we talk today, it's had about 500,000 views.
Yeah,
and I hope people will view it and consider what is said in there, and yes, please definitely leave comments.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It was Dan Richards from Dedunking, who's a good friend of mine. He's been on the show here.
Dan is great.
He's great.
I'm very fond of Dan,
Yep.
and Dan has really played an important role in exposing the dishonesty of archaeology in general.
Right.
I appreciate the support that he's given from my point of view. Dan is totally objective and unbiased. Dan will, he calls his channel Dedunking, but fundamentally he is these days focusing largely on debunking mainstream archaeologists and what they have to say, but he will also debunk the alternative side as well.
Right.
He'll do both.
Right.
And if Dan makes a mistake, he'll own up and honestly correct it in the next few days. Very open-minded guy. But there's been so much calculated, vicious, unpleasant, so-called debunking of alternative points of view about the past by mainstream archaeologists and their friends in the media and their followers, that it was high time that a channel was started which is willing to debunk the orthodox positions as well.
Right.
And that is what Dan is doing very, very effectively. And I'd urge any of your viewers to pay attention to Dan's Dedunking channel on YouTube. There's lots of great content on there.
There is.
And he's just a really good human being. I'm going to be meeting up with him in a few days' time.
Oh, good for you. Okay, excellent. Yeah.
We've been, of course, in contact remotely because I live in England. And,
Right.
And he lives in up near Spokane. But we're going to meet up on this trip, and I'm really looking forward to meeting you.
Great. Good to hear. Yeah. Why do you think there's so much just animosity towards you and towards? I mean, so on the one hand, you're just an open-minded individual who's exploring possibilities.
I like to feel that that's what I am.
Absolutely.
Everybody has their own point of view.
Yeah.
And sure, we all get wedded to our position, and it's difficult to let it go. But I try as far as possible to be open-minded. My position is that what I call mainstream archaeology, and I know archaeologists don't like that phrase. They just want to say archaeology. They're so mainstream that there's no need even to say mainstream. They are hugely influential in shaping opinions about the past. And that influence begins almost at the moment that we go to school. Everything that we're going to learn through the school system and that we're going to learn in university about the past is derived from information provided by mainstream archaeologists. And in that way, we're almost taking in the orthodox point of view from the moment that we begin to be able to take information in at all. So it's very dominant. It's very, very powerful. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think it's healthy for any particular group of people to have a monopoly on something as important as our collective past as human beings. I think it's a terrible mistake. And yet archaeologists seem to feel that they are the only ones who are entitled to speak about the past, and that it's almost like the Roman Catholic Church in the 16th century dealing with heretics. Those of us on the alternative side sometimes feel that these archaeologists want to burn us at the stake because we're representing opposite points of view, and the archaeologists have done everything they possibly can. Now that my Netflix series is there, they've done everything possible that they possibly can to keep me out of archaeological sites. We've been able to break through that barrier on a number of occasions. But for example, in season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, I would have liked to have been present on the ground at Cahokia in Illinois, a site that I visited many, many times before and written about extensively in my 2019 book, America Before, with great respect for the indigenous builders of Cahokia. But because archaeology has sort of spread around this myth that somehow my lost civilization is taking away credit from indigenous peoples. This is being used as an excuse to block me getting access to archaeological sites. So I would love to have filmed at Cahokia, and I'd love to have filmed at Moundville in Alabama. And both those sites were closed to us simply because I'm presenting the story. Now, to me, that is the crudest form of censorship. And yet, at the same time, it's a very powerful force of censorship. Because when you're on camera, you want to be standing in the place that you're talking about. You want to be hands-on. You want to be boots on the ground. And they prevented that from happening. And I think if they had their way, this is particularly American archaeologists, organized under a group called the Society for American Archaeology. Back when season 1 of Ancient Apocalypse was launched in November 2022, the Society for American Archaeology wrote an open letter to Netflix, pretty much demanding that the series be reclassified as science fiction instead of as a documentary series, which is a very effective way to actually cancel me. That was seeking to cancel me. You know what? If the thing is called science fiction, it's not going to get the viewers that it's going to get as a documentary, and they knew that, and that was the angle that they took. But fortunately, Netflix are an independent force, and they made up their own mind about this, and that's why we now have a season 2. But it's this seeking to control the narrative about the past that archaeologists indulge themselves in, which I think is particularly unfortunate. And I think it's really necessary to have the alternative points of view brought forward. And I'm happy that there should be multiple points of view. I'm not a promoter of the ancient astronaut theory. That's not my view. I think that most of the mysteries that we confront in our past can be explained by the idea of a lost human civilization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I'm glad that the ancient astronaut material is out there as well, because it's responding to the same need that I'm responding to, which is the dissatisfaction that many people feel with what archaeologists are telling them about the past. And the other thing is that archaeologists, particularly this vocal minority of archaeologists who've been trying so hard to get me cancelled, that they have this sense of entitlement that it's all theirs and that nobody else should be allowed to speak about it, and this is a very odd thing, and it's an unhealthy thing. The general public, I have great respect for the intelligence of the general public, and I think the general public should be given a range of choices to decide what they think about, and indeed to launch themselves into investigations about the past if they're interested in the past. Not everybody is, but some of us are. And the more points of view that are brought onto this huge mystery, I mean, right back to the origins of the human species, right through to the origins of civilization, there is so much that is unexplained. And I'm personally not at all satisfied with the mainstream narratives. And I will do everything I can, and I will fight until my time comes to leave this planet to allow the public to hear alternative points of view. And I think archaeologists should be ashamed of themselves and their friends in the media, people like Sapiens Anthropology magazine, people like The Guardian and The Observer in the UK have published huge hit pieces on me without ever once reaching out to me for comment, just relying on what the archaeologists tell them. And this is a failure of journalism. When I was a journalist, back in the 1970s, you could not write negatively about somebody unless you at least had the courtesy to reach out to them and ask for their comment and their point of view. And that's not happened here. So maybe it's a territorial thing. Maybe archaeologists, we are all a bit territorial. It's a natural human thing. Maybe they feel this is their territory. And they don't want outsiders in there muddying the waters in any way.
I think it's an ego thing. I think it's an identification with, I think it's mistaking a belief system for the truth. I mean, they have this narrative that they've conjured up, and it's a story, and everything in it is 100% true, as opposed to your perspective, which is I'm going to stay open-minded and I'm going to challenge. Yeah. This is why a debate format for you isn't the right format. No. It's you're really about having discussions with other open-minded people.
That's right.
And discussions and debates, like, I mean, we see the presidential debate when we see what happens when two closed-minded people who are unwilling to see that there can be another possible alternative start to talk to each other. It's a disaster. And that's what when people operate under a belief system like that, like Flint, who is at 0% possibility for an ancient civilization, that's where Flint is. That's a belief. Whether it's 100% or 0% is a belief either way. And he can't see that. And so he'll do anything to continue this narrative that he believes in his mind is 100% true, and that's a shame, because then he'll lie, he'll and people will do that. They'll lie. They'll like you said. I mean, they'll do worse than that. They'll do attack pieces and hit pieces on people, and it's just a shame that we're not able to see that that's what's causing it.
And the past is a universal human heritage. We all have a share in the past.
Right.
It's important that we should all have a voice on the past if we want to have a voice. And it's wrong for it to be monopolized by a sort of elite class of academics who believe that only they are entitled to speak to us about the past, and only their narrative. And you're right, it is largely a narrative. Information in archaeology it often takes a long time for an old paradigm that was actually completely false but was regarded as totally true by archaeologists. It often takes
Clovis first.
Clovis first is the classic example. It often takes a long time for the old paradigm to be overthrown. It took more than 30, maybe 40 years in the case of Clovis first, which in brief is the notion that a culture who archaeologists call the Clovis culture, we don't know what they call themselves. Archaeologists call them the Clovis culture because the first evidence of that culture was found at a place called Blackwater Draw in Arizona, and the nearest town is the town of Clovis. Actually, I'm forgetting if it's Arizona or New Mexico. Is the town of Clovis, and the archaeologists used to go there after the dig to have some beer, and they decided to call this culture Clovis. And the view was that those artifacts date back about 13,000 or 13,400 years. And the view was adamantly maintained that there were no human beings in the Americas before this culture. And it took 30 or 40 years of new evidence, which proved that humans had been in the Americas much earlier than that, and not only in North America, but also in South America and Central America. It took 30 plus years to overthrow the Clovis first paradigm. And there may even be some archaeologists who are still hanging on to it, who are still trying to, quote unquote, debunk the evidence of an earlier human presence in the Americas. But largely, it's dead in the water now because new evidence has overwhelmed that paradigm. But what a pity that years were wasted sticking religiously to a particular point of view. And I do really mean wasted, because when you talk about archaeological excavations, the deeper you dig, the older the layers you're digging into. And during this period of 30 or 40 years of Clovis first, it was held in archaeology, in American archaeology, that there was no point in digging deeper than the Clovis level, because we wouldn't find anything, because we know that Clovis were first. This unfortunately led to a failure of archaeology to investigate the deeper levels. And what a waste. That could have been done so much earlier. And lo and behold, when those deeper levels were investigated, evidence of human presence much earlier was found.
Right.
And instead of welcoming that, the reaction of the elite that control archaeology was to reject it, to insult those who had found the new evidence, to try to pretend that they were hoaxers or liars or frauds. I find these words being applied to my work constantly by archaeologists. Without providing any evidence, they say, he's a hoaxer, he's a liar, he's a grifter, he's a fraud. I see that again and again and again, as though by repeating it often enough, they can somehow make it true. But I defy anybody to find any statement I've ever made that is a deliberate, calculated lie. I may have made some honest mistakes, but I'm not here to hoax people or to grift people. I'm here to follow my passion and to share my curiosity about the past with others who are also curious about the past.
Yep. Good for you. Love it. And we should mention that there are some great archaeologists that are open-minded, that are okay with exploring. I think on Ancient Apocalypse, episode 6, season 2, you talked to Dr. Ed Barnhart at length. And
very open-minded guy, Ed Barnhart. I like him very much. He doesn't agree with what I say, certainly not with everything that I say, but he's willing to engage in respectful and friendly conversations with me, and he doesn't see the need for all these ad hominem attacks that have been directed at me. And in fact, through season 2, we have encounters with archaeologists who are open-minded, and particularly, for example, Martti Paasinen, who's an archaeologist from the University of Helsinki, who's been involved in exposing to the world these incredible, massive geometrical earthworks that have been found in the Amazon, and his colleague Alceu Ranzi, who is a geographer from Brazil. There's an example there on the screen. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, nobody knew these were there. Right. But because of the clearances of the Amazon rainforest that are tragically taking place now, this is one of the big mistakes that the human species is making. The reason that the Amazon rainforest is being cleared is because of poverty and because of economic demand. People are desperate to settle and create farms. This has resulted in burning down huge areas of the Amazon rainforest and planting farms there. One of the great things that the wealthy, industrialized countries could do is to make it economically attractive for people in Brazil and other countries in South America, make it economically attractive for them to preserve the Amazon rather than destroy it and turn it into a short-term economic gain that will be a long-term disaster for them and for the planet as a whole. We need to make that choice. The Amazon is a precious resource for humanity, and it's a collective resource. It has an impact on the whole world, which is often not realized. And to just allow it to be destroyed. And not to find other ways around it. We shouldn't be complaining wildly about those settlers. They're simply doing what any human being does, which is to find a way to make a living.
Right.
But there's so much wealth in the northern industrialized countries that another way for them to make a living could be found, which is look after this beautiful garden of trees which extends across millions of square kilometers. Look after it, preserve it. We'll make it worth your economic while to do that. They would make a rational decision. They wouldn't go burn the forest down. They wouldn't put a ranch there or a soybean farm. They would look after the Amazon. So anyway, to come to the point, it's precisely those settling of farmers in the Amazon and the slash and burn of the Amazon rainforest that has revealed these incredible geometrical earthworks, which nobody expected to be found under the rainforest, as we're seeing here. And it's fascinating. We're seeing all sorts of geometrical shapes: squares, circles, rectangles, circles within squares. They're often connected by huge roadways. Clear avenues connect sites that are kilometers apart. And this has been a total surprise to the world of archaeology, because until 20 years ago, there was a firm assumption that the Amazon was a pristine rainforest, and that there had been very few human beings in it for thousands and thousands of years, and that we shouldn't expect to find anything much there, let alone enormous geometrical earthworks, and let alone cities, because that's the other thing that's now being revealed in the Amazon, is that the Amazon once held a population of tens of millions who were able to sustain themselves in that environment extremely effectively, and indeed lived in permanent settlements that are rightly described as cities. This is all breakthrough new information, which is changing everything. And what we've done in season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse is to work with Marty and with Alceo, who are the leading researchers working on this field, who do not despise my work, who do not feel that only they are entitled to speak about the past. I had a very good, positive, friendly working relationship with them. This is a way to bring the news to people all around the world.
So, Graham, if we're talking about an ancient lost civilization that was advanced in some way, and we were to compare that civilization to our civilization, either in the past 1,000 years or the future 1,000 years, what century would they align with?
No century.
No century.
Because it's become very clear to me, with my long-term immersion in this field, that what we're looking at is not ourselves. And it's a mistake if we're looking for a lost civilization in the past to look for something like ourselves, something very different from ourselves. And I've said it often, and I'll say it again. All human civilizations, wherever we find them in the world, have developed out of shamanism. Our ancestors in what's called the Upper Paleolithic, the last phase of the Stone Age, were shamanistic cultures. And shamanism is a surprisingly scientific endeavor. Many people in the West will think, oh, shamanism, some kind of mumbo-jumbo. No, it's not. Shamans are constantly exploring their environment and understanding the plants that are present in that environment, and seeing what healing modalities they might have to offer, and constantly mixing different plants together to see the result, and then having got a result, adding a pinch of this or a pinch of that to it as well. It's a very experimental process. And broadly, what I'm saying is that there was, during the Ice Age, in my view, and by the way, I never claim that I've proved this. I'm following my own curiosity. I've been led into this path because I'm curious about the past. I've never said that I've proved that such a civilization existed. I am saying that here is evidence that's worthy of looking at if you consider this. So to cut a long story short, a civilization, I suggest, developed out of shamanism in the Ice Age that went a rather different way, or a slightly different way, from other shamanistic cultures. Those same tools, those same scientific tools of shamanism led them to discoveries and explorations that perhaps other shamanistic cultures did not reach. But I've often been taken out of context in this. I have said on the record a number of times that they had, I think, a technology equivalent to ours in the 19th or even the 18th century. And this is taken to assume that I'm saying that they maybe had steam engines or the kind of rudimentary but machine tech that we had in the 18th and 19th centuries. And actually, that's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm just talking about the results of what I see. And the two particular key points for me are ancient knowledge of longitude. How do I know about this? Because there is a fascinating category of maps that have been preserved and passed down. And in every case, the maps we're looking at were maps that were drawn in the 14th, 15th, 16th century, but they were based on older source maps. And the map makers will often tell us that. Piri Reis map was based on more than 25 source maps. And Admiral Piri Reis, who drew that map, of which only a fraction now survives. But on that fraction, he states in his own handwriting that it is based not only on explorations in his time, but also on maps that go back to the time of Alexander the Great. He's referring to there's the Piri Reis map. On the left, we have South America, the east coast of South America, and on the right, we have the east coast of West Africa. The west coast of Africa. And then when you go down to the bottom of the Piri Reis map, you're finding a representation of Antarctica at a time when sea levels were lower and the Antarctic continent was much larger and was joined to South America. But what's interesting about these maps is not only that they are based on copies of older source maps, but that they incorporate extremely accurate relative longitudes. And that is a mystery, because our high-tech civilization didn't crack the longitude problem until the mid-18th century. Before that, it was all done by dead reckoning. Navigators had no idea really where they were. They could be 300 or 400 miles east or west of a particular point, and they wouldn't know it. Longitude, once you've got that worked out, and in the case of our civilization, that involved a chronometer that could keep accurate time at sea. Once you've got that worked out, you can know exactly where you are. So to find accurate longitudes on maps that were drawn themselves hundreds of years before we'd cracked the longitude problem, and that are based on lost source maps that may go back to the time of the Lost Library of Alexandria and even before. That's very interesting, and it's very hard to explain. And also on these same maps, it's not shown so clearly on the Piri Reis map, but it is shown on the Orontius Phineus map. The presence of Antarctica is puzzling. Honest maps based on knowledge of seafarers in the 1800s and not drawing on older source maps. Yeah, that's one version, but there's another version where you can actually see Antarctica very, very clearly. Yes, that one that we have now, that one there. You can see immediately that it's being labeled bad archaeology, even to talk about it. But to me, this is an intriguing mystery, because this map is drawn in the 1530s. The legend in Latin at the bottom tells us that he is revealing to us parts of the world that had hitherto been hidden in darkness, and those include Antarctica. And this is a problem, because our civilization didn't discover Antarctica until 1820. But there it is on these old maps, based on when he says hidden in darkness, I'm taking him to refer to archives of older maps that were there. So at the tip of South America, we have Antarctica, and it's also at the tip of South Africa. It's exactly in the right place, a bit bigger than it is today. But there it is. So this speaks to me not only of a culture that had understood how to calculate longitude accurately, but had also explored the world and mapped the world long before we ourselves were able to do so. And then the other aspect that I focus on, and again, this does not require machine technology. It does not require us to look like, it doesn't require a lost civilization to look like our civilization looked in the 18th or 19th century, is highly sophisticated knowledge of astronomy. This is another thing that we can just track back further and further and further in time, and particularly knowledge of a rather hard-to-observe phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes. Now, mainstream archaeology, I'm going to keep using that word because they don't like the word mainstream, because it's just archaeology. They own it all. There's no such thing as alternative archaeology. We don't exist. We're just annoying. Right. You know. The hard-to-observe phenomenon of precession of the equinoxes, mainstream archaeology attributes that to the Greeks, possibly to the Babylonians, but generally it's put back to around 300 BC, about 2,300 years ago. A couple of Greek astronomers figured out that the pole star was very gradually changing in the sky. It was no longer the pole star, that the stars that rose behind the sun, the zodiacal constellations that lie on the path of the sun, that these were gradually shifting. And it was understood that this was a process that took place at roughly the rate of 1 degree every 72 years, a very slow process. So the whole cycle of precession will take just under 26,000 years to complete before the constellation that housed the sun at dawn on the spring equinox returns to do that same job again. And this requires very detailed record keeping and very long observation. I don't know whether the ancients understood that precession is an observation that is caused by a wobble on the axis of the Earth. The Earth is our viewing platform. We see the skies from that viewing platform. A wobble on that platform, even if it's very, very slow, will, over a long period of time, change the position of everything in the sky. Most notable in the case of the pole star, which in our case is Polaris, but was not Polaris in the past. That sometimes the extended north pole of the Earth pointed at empty space. At other times it's pointed at other stars. And it won't always point at Polaris because the Earth is doing this. And the same with the constellations of the zodiac, and particularly the marker of the spring equinox, 21st of March in the Northern Hemisphere, that rise behind the sun. So in other words, if you're looking at the horizon an hour before dawn on the spring equinox, you're going to see a constellation lying on the horizon, just above the horizon. And then as the sun rises, you'll see that it's rising into exactly the place that was occupied by that constellation. And that constellation was considered to define the character of a world age. And again, mainstream archaeology rejects any notion that there was any knowledge of the constellations of the zodiac prior to about 2,000 or 2,300 years ago. And that's always seemed to me absurd, because the ancients, not just my proposed lost civilization, but all ancient cultures, were very focused on the stars, very focused on the sky. It was an ever-present reality to them. And it's really hard to miss the zodiacal constellations and their relationship to the sun if you are a culture that is observing the stars constantly. It's very hard to miss it. So I think it's actually pouring scorn on the achievements of the ancients to imagine that they didn't recognize the zodiacal constellations. They may have defined them, they may not have called them the same thing we do. They may have depicted them symbolically slightly differently from the way that we do, but those constellations, I believe, have been recognized for tens of thousands of years. And there's evidence, for example, for the recognizing of the constellation of Taurus in Lascaux Cave in France, in the cave art in France. You find the stars of the Pleiades on the shoulder of the bull, exactly where they should be. And what drew me to this, and I'd like to share this with your listeners and viewers, what drew me to this is a very hard-to-read book, but an extremely interesting book called Hamlet's Mill by Giorgio de Santillana, who was professor of the history of science at MIT, and Hertha von Deschend, who was professor of the history of science at Frankfurt University. Major mainstream academics. They published this book in the 1960s when academia, particularly archaeology, was perhaps less controlling about the narrative of the past than it is today. And the bottom line of that extraordinary book is that the notion that the Greeks discovered precession is complete rubbish. And they present evidence for that notion going far, far back into the past. And it's combined with a series of numbers which relate to the rate of change caused by precession, 1 degree every 72 years. So 43,200 is 72 times 600. 432,000, which is the number of syllables in the Rig Veda, is a multiple of 72. There's a numbers game being played in ancient myths and traditions, and at the heart of them is the number 72. But numbers that are related to it, like 108, which is 72 plus 36 is 108. Divide that by 2, you get 54. According to the work done by Santillana and von Deschend, these are all speaking about precession when these numbers are there. And at the same time, it's combined with particular imagery of a whirling, churning process taking place. In India, they call it the churning of the Milky Ocean, where you see the serpent Vasuki wrapped around Mount Mandara, and you see figures of gods on one side holding onto one part of Vasuki and figures of demons on the other holding on to the other part of Vasuki. And there's an image of it. And churning the Milky Ocean, this churning, whirling process. Interestingly, the purpose of churning the Milky Ocean is to produce Amrita, the elixir of immortality. which is interesting in itself. In ancient Egypt, you have imagery of the god Horus and the god Set. Again, a deity, a good deity and a bad deity. Set was always regarded as a negative figure, standing on either side of what looks like a kind of drill, and they're rotating it in the same sort of way. And Hamlet's mill is the same idea, comes from ancient Norse mythology, Lodi's mill, about this whirling, churning whirlpool in the ocean. It's essentially the same idea. So the combination of this imagery of a churn turning in the heavens and of a series of numbers that are related to the precession of the equinoxes convinces them, plus much other evidence, which I've also shared in my books, that there was a very ancient knowledge of precession, which they attribute to what they call some almost unbelievable ancestor civilization. They don't pin down when that ancestor civilization existed, but they suggest that it passed down a legacy of knowledge to many other cultures around the world. And that's really actually one of the key issues, one of the key books that set me on my own quest. To look, where did this knowledge come from? Where did this information come from? So I'm more talking about what we can know, is that there was knowledge of longitude. There was knowledge of parts of the world that we didn't discover until the 1820s. And there was a highly sophisticated knowledge of astronomy based on long-term observation and record keeping, that these things are present in the ancient past, even though archaeologists may choose to ignore them. And what is the best explanation for those? And I do think that the best explanation, I do not claim that I've proved it, but I do think that the best explanation is a forgotten episode in the human past, a lost civilization which had solved these problems, and which then passed these ideas down to later cultures all around the world. And this is one of the things that annoys archaeologists. They say that I'm taking credit away from those other cultures all around the world because this idea was diffused to them by the survivors of a lost civilization. It always strikes me as deeply hypocritical, actually, because archaeologists, and again, American archaeologists, are very much in the lead on this. They're very strongly against the idea of dissemination. The present model is that every culture around the world completely invented itself without any contact or influence from any other culture around the world. The only exception they make is in Europe. In the case of Europe, archaeologists are fully agreed that Europeans didn't have a clue about farming until around about 6,000 years ago, and that they only learnt about farming because farmers from Turkey, from Anatolia, migrated into Western Europe and taught them how to farm. So somehow the notion that information, ideas, skills can be disseminated from one culture to another are perfectly acceptable when they're being disseminated from Southwest Asia to Western Europe, but are not acceptable in any other direction.
Yeah, let's go to South America for a bit, and maybe to the Americas in general. And I want to get your thoughts there because obviously that's the big focus of season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse. Can you summarize just real quick in terms of like what is the mainstream explanation for when humans first came to the Americas, and how does that differ from what your current thoughts are on when humans got here?
Yes. Well, again, looking at the mainstream explanation, we are looking at a work in progress. Now that Clovis first, that really bad idea, that true pseudoscience, they call me and my colleagues pseudoscientists, but Clovis first is a classic example of pseudoscience, which maintained itself for far too long. Now that that's been dispensed with, well, why has it been dispensed with? It's been dispensed with because gradually new information has come forward which can't be disputed, which shows that human beings were living in the Americas long before that. And that's why we start with episode 1 of season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, looking at the human footprints that were found in White Sands, New Mexico. And these footprints, you can't date the footprints themselves, but what they've succeeded in doing is ancient seeds that were embedded in many of the footprints.
23,000 years.
And they go back 23,000 years into the past. So that on its own blows Clovis first completely out of the water. Never mind the presence of sites going back 30 or 40,000 years in South America. Now there's much more. There are much earlier sites. I've chosen to focus in this episode on in the first episode of season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse on those footprints from New Mexico, because hardly anybody now in the archaeological community disputes that. There was a time when they first published that information, when those archaeologists who'd made those finds were attacked, but they doubled down and they backed up their case and they found other ways of dating, and now it's just accepted universally that those footprints are 23,000 years old. And it's a very intimate connection with fellow humans from 23,000 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, if we know there were humans in South America even long before that, thousands of years before that, it's not shocking that humans...
Well, it shouldn't be shocking, but you have to understand that there's been a rigorous fight back against any suggestion that humans were in South America before humans were in North America.
Okay,
Again, that is beginning to crumble in the face of new evidence. Tom Dillehay at Monte Alban, Monteverde, in South America was one of the first to come up against this opposition, but he proved that site had been settled much earlier than was previously accepted. There's a whole argument about sites in South America, which I suspect eventually will go the same way as Clovis first, because the information is in fact extremely compelling. But I chose to focus on White Sands because that's an area where I'm not in any dispute with mainstream archaeology. They can't say, oh, this is a hoax or this is a fraud, because they absolutely accept that is the case. But, for example, if you go to San Diego, the San Diego Natural History Museum, you will see an exhibit there about what is called the Cerruti Mastodon site. And this was, the lead excavator was Tom Demaray of San Diego Natural History Museum. I know him. I've been and interviewed him for my book, America Before. He and his team found evidence that human beings had been present just south of San Diego 130,000 years ago. That's so much, that's 10 times older than Clovis and way older than those footprints in New Mexico. And naturally, and he first published this in Nature. I mean, to get an article which is overturning the story of the peopling of the Americas published in Nature is no easy task. That went through a rigorous peer review process, and it was published. It's never been retracted, but it's been attacked a lot. And those attacks have been refuted by Tom Demaray and his team. But I didn't bring that up in season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, because I know that there's so much noise and fuss and nonsense around it. The main point I wanted to make with those footprints is we now know for sure that the Americas have been inhabited for a very long time.
Right.
And during that time period, archaeologists haven't really been looking for what those human beings might have been doing. So the answer to the question is of how do I differ is I think that the 130,000-year-old date is solid. Mm-hmm. I think it's really solid. Yeah. These are mastodon bones that were broken open, fractured by human activity to extract the marrow from the bones. We don't know for sure they were anatomically modern humans. They might have been Denisovans, they might have been Neanderthals, but they were doing human-like things. That extraction of marrow using tools is classic human behavior. I'm not saying they were an advanced civilization, but I'm saying they were there. Right. And once we begin to take on board the notion that human beings might have been in the Americas for 130,000 years, which is far longer than human beings, anatomically modern humans, were in Europe, then we're really bound to investigate what they might have been doing, rather than just saying, we don't need to look at that period for human activity because we know it wasn't there. We have to look and see what was happening. And that's a process that's beginning to unfold now.
Good. Yeah, when we look at South America, for me, and you think about an ice age and going back, where the ice age, quote unquote, ended. Well, maybe we'll get into whether or not it actually ended.
Yeah, arguably we're in an interglacial.
Exactly,
at the moment.
an interglacial, right now. But that began, the interglacial period began about 12,800-ish years ago. A
little bit later than that. Okay. 12,800 years ago, we were still in the ice age, and 12,800 years ago was the, again, this language, last ice age. You're right. What we live in now, the Holocene, is regarded as an interglacial period, that we're part of a much longer sequence of ice ages, and there will be future ice ages.
So it's going to get cold again.
It's going to get cold again. That's the as it has done over millions and millions of years.
Yep.
But 12,800 years ago, the world had actually been warming up quite nicely. And it was significantly warmer than it was at the last glacial maximum, which is about 21,000 years ago. It was still definitely an ice age, but the world was getting a much more comfortable place to live. And then suddenly there was a massive plunge of global temperatures, a rise in sea levels at the same time, and evidence of cataclysms all around the world. Right. This is why we call my series Ancient Apocalypse, because I regard that moment. It's referred to geologically as the Younger Dryas. It's an episode of really weird climate that affected the Earth between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. So if you're looking for a real date for the end of the last ice age, if we're going to call it, it would be 11,600 years ago. Right. That's when the final collapse begins, and we have this huge pulse of meltwater going into the world ocean called Meltwater Pulse 1b, and that truly is the beginning of the modern epoch, which is called the Holocene.
Right. So 11.6, and humans we know go back at least a couple of 100,000 years, and probably more. Homo sapiens like us.
Yeah, Homo sapiens like us. This is also a story that's a work in progress. I can remember a time not so long ago, back in the 1990s, when it was thought that anatomically modern humans were very recent, but only 50,000 years ago or so.
Right.
And then there was discoveries in Ethiopia of anatomically modern human remains, which were just under 200,000 years old, about 196,000. And then there was a discovery in Morocco, at Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, of anatomically modern human remains that were 310,000 years old. Keeps on getting pushed back. I wouldn't be surprised if evidence is found even earlier of that of anatomically modern humans. But at that time, those anatomically modern humans were coexisting with what we can only reasonably describe as other human species. Right. The Neanderthals were a human species. They're not called Homo neanderthalensis for nothing. They're part of the Homo species. And Homo denisovans, the Denisovans, these are cousin species, very closely related to anatomically modern humans, so closely related that anatomically modern humans and they were able to interbreed successfully. And we still carry Neanderthal and Denisovan genes within us today. Right. And gradually it's beginning to realize that these archaic human species with whom anatomically modern humans interbred were much more sophisticated than had previously been realized. Neanderthal used to be a word that was used for sort of thuggish, ignorant, Stone Age, brute behavior. Because there was this negative idea of people in the Stone Age. Of course, they weren't thuggish or brutish at all. They were just exactly like us. But you can still insult somebody by referring to them as a Neanderthal. Well, the new evidence shows that the Neanderthals were sensitive, they were creative, they created art, and it's very possible that they taught anatomically modern humans how to do art as well. So we have to open our minds to the achievements of these cousin species that existed as well. But to be specific, anatomically modern humans, the earliest finding is about 310,000 years ago. And that's one of the things that bothers me is when you've got all the anatomically modern kit, all the stuff that we use to make our great civilization, why do you wait 310,000 years or 300,000 years before you start applying that?
Right, yeah. Question of whether we did or not. Ryan, can you pull up Google Earth? Yeah, so I want to ask you about what, so the current story is that humans came from a land bridge that connected.
That's right. That's right. You're up there in Alaska.
Right.
And you've got what are now the Bering Straits between Alaska and Siberia.
Right.
But those were not oceanic straits during the Ice Age. They were a land bridge. Why? Because sea level was 400 feet lower during the Ice Age than it is today. Why was sea level 400 feet lower? Because a huge amount of water had been taken out of the world oceans and had fallen on frozen areas and had turned into ice. North American ice cap was up to 3 kilometers deep at that point. Naturally, sea level was lower. All that water wasn't in the sea, it was on the ice caps.
Right. And you have the weight of the ice caps pushing the Earth down and creating a bulge at the equator that would make things even higher.
This is the phenomenon called isostasy, that when you have an incredibly weighty thing sitting on top of one part of a landmass, it's going to push up other parts that are connected with it.
Right.
We can see that in in Britain right now with the Isle of Wight. Because there was an ice cap on northern Scotland, the Isle of Wight in the English Channel was pushed up. But now the ice cap's gone from northern Scotland, the Isle of Wight is sinking down into the English Channel. And that's not caused by sea level rise, that's caused by isostasy. And this is a phenomenon that needs to be taken account of, particularly with things like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. But to come to your point, to go back to that map, the idea was that during the Ice Age, when the Bering Straits were a land bridge, that's how people first came into America, that they migrated by land across the Bering Straits. They happened to find an ice-free corridor through that massive ice cap, and they made their way slowly down into North America, thence into Central America, thence into South America. And this was all tied to the Clovis first notion that those were the first adventurers who came into the Americas from Siberia.
So that means no people in South America either before Clovis.
Yes, that's right. That's what it means. And in fact, it's in South America that we're finding, some of the best signs of much older settlement.
Right.
And the particularly intriguing thing to me, and I go into this in the series, and I've gone into it in my book America Before, is genetic evidence that connects people who lived in New Guinea and Australia and people in the western part of the Amazon rainforest. We're looking at New Guinea and Australia as they look today. But if you were to go back to the last ice age, you would find that New Guinea, go left a bit. New Guinea, that's New Guinea sitting on top of Australia there. That was actually joined to Australia during the last ice age.
Sure. But all of this would have been above water as well, right?
Some parts would have been. Some parts of the Pacific Ocean that are underwater now would have been above water. And islands in the Pacific Ocean that may be quite small now would have been much larger during the Ice Age. That's why the Easter Island tradition of a lost land called Hiva, which we go into in season 2, is particularly interesting because they talk about an island landmass in the Pacific from which extraordinary people came, which had been submerged by a sudden flood, and that actually happened in the Pacific. It happened a lot. And the supposed myth of a lost large island in the Pacific is by no means impossible during the Ice Age. It makes perfect sense. So the fact is that we have a genetic signal that connects people from Australasia, from Papua New Guinea, from Taiwan, from Australia itself, Aboriginal people, with certain tribes in South America, but we don't find that signal anywhere in North America, suggests to me very strongly that they made a crossing of the Pacific during the Ice Age.
I'm 100% with you, Graham, and that's kind of my not 100%. That would be a belief, but I think it's very highly likely that you're absolutely right. And I want to just show you this on Google Earth, and when you look out at Easter Island, which is right there, and you take a scroll to the right, and you see all of these other islands, which if sea level was 400, not islands, they're underwater, but if sea level was 400 feet lower, and you did have that extra weight on the ice caps, it'd be very easy to navigate all of this islands. It's like a little hockey stick that goes right to Peru, into the Amazon.
Absolutely.
And now we're seeing all this DNA evidence that all of these people over here, their DNA from Australia, Papua New Guinea, is in South America. So, I mean, doesn't that say that we had during the Ice Age, at some point in the last 300,000 years that humans have been on this planet, that they could have made it from that, from there to there?
Very strongly suggests that. And there are intriguing connections, cultural connections between South America and Easter Island, which one of the first people to propose that was the late, great Thor Heyerdahl, who I had the privilege of knowing, who did the Kon-Tiki expedition, who did the Ra expedition, proved that the ancients could have been seafarers on a dramatic scale. He saw connections between cultural manifestations, the way certain stones are cut, for example, in South America and Easter Island. Right. And he was ridiculed by the archaeological community at that time. But actually now new DNA evidence has emerged, which shows that there is in fact a DNA connection between the peoples of South America and the peoples of Easter Island. Again and again, ideas that were once ridiculed are turning out to be true. And you're right, that ridge of now submerged land masses is particularly interesting. And it would have made the challenge of crossing between Easter Island and South America much less challenging. But I have to say that to find Easter Island at all is a challenge. It's not something you could really do by accident. You know, if you're going to settle an island, you have to come with a population that is large enough to sustain itself, that will not go extinct. And what you're first going to do is you're going to undertake explorations with relatively few people. And then if you find something interesting, you're going to go back where you came from and bring more people with you. And that's what I think we're looking at in the case of Easter Island. And that's the story of Easter Island. They talk about survivors of the lost land of Hiva. They knew their island was going to be submerged. They had seen signs of this. They knew it was happening. They had to find somewhere else to go. And they sent out explorers all over the world to find lands. And one of the lands they found was Easter Island. They returned to Hiva before the cataclysm. They had advanced knowledge of this. And then a proper expedition was mounted and Easter Island was populated.
Right. Ryan, can you pull up the images of the walls that we have on Easter Island and the walls that we have in Peru? I mean, it's just fascinating, the similarities that you see between. It
really is,
yeah. And which could have only, I mean, yeah. So here we go. Sacsayhuaman, Peru.
Yeah.
That's Easter Island on the bottom right, which
Yes.
I didn't know that it existed, but I mean, you're looking at essentially the exact same stonework.
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
You are. The same way of, and first of all, that particular ahu, as it's called, ahu vinapu, is different. Ahu is the word they use on Easter Island for the platforms on which the great moai, the statues, are positioned. I think that many of the moais and I think that the platforms, the ahus on which they're placed, have actually been, the moai have been replaced on restructured, rebuilt platforms. And those platforms are often of very poor quality, and yet they are used to date the moai. But there are a few of them, and Vinapu is one of them, which are made of basalt and beautifully cut. Right. Beautifully precision placing of them in exactly the same way that we find the precision placing of blocks in polygonal patterns at a place like Sacsayhuaman. And I think what we're seeing at Ahu Vinapu is one of the original ahus that go back to the first settlement of Easter Island, which I suggest was during the Ice Age. We know that Easter Island was massively settled later by Polynesians, and all the inhabitants of Easter Island today are fundamentally of Polynesian heritage. But I'm suggesting that there was an earlier episode of settlement as well, and that Ahu Vinapu is an example of that. Mm-hmm. It's completely different from the other platforms on Easter Island. The stonework is stunningly similar to the stonework of Sacsayhuaman, and there it sits, requiring explanation and actually completely undateable by any known means.
Right. So, I mean, that is compelling evidence.
I think so.
I mean, it's super compelling.
I think so, but it's heresy.
Right, of course.
To suggest such a thing.
If you're a believer, then it's heresy. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But if you're open-minded, it's super compelling.
It attracts the curiosity. Yeah. We start to wonder, well, why are there so many supposedly coincidental similarities between cultures all around the world, when those cultures may have been separated not only by thousands of miles, but also in some cases by thousands of years.
Right.
Why do the same ideas keep on cropping up? And it's not enough for me, at any rate, to say that, this is just what human beings naturally come up with everywhere. The similarities are too close, they're too precise, they're too detailed.
Right.
Again, I suggest that the best explanation for those similarities, whether it's in spiritual systems or in the way that monuments are constructed, that those similarities, what we're looking at is a legacy of ideas that has been passed down from very remote prehistory. And once you're dealing with ideas rather than simply physical objects, of course, it's possible for ideas to survive for millennia and to be passed on. So I don't have to say that Cahokia, for example, where I wasn't allowed to film, that Cahokia is the work of a lost civilization. I've never said that at all. I'm fully accept that Cahokia is entirely the work of indigenous Native Americans, but I do suggest that it incorporates ideas that are much older. And, you know, the simplest, clearest example which I often give of this is if you go to any Gothic cathedral in Europe, for example, Chartres Cathedral in France, you will find that monument was certainly built in 12 or 1300 AD, just 700 or 800 years ago. But it is manifesting and expressing in its symbolism ideas that go back to the time of Abraham, which is 2000 BC. So there's nothing ridiculous about suggesting that ideas can constantly be remanifested in structures down the ages. And it's the history of those ideas that intrigues me, and why they're found all around the world, and why there are so many surprising similarities that lead me to the conclusion that we've lost an episode in our story, and that we have a global legacy of that forgotten episode, and we're just not recognizing it as such.
Right.
And those of us who are working on the alternative side of prehistory do recognize it, and archaeologists universally condemn any notion of a forgotten episode in the human story. I think time will prove them wrong. We're in a battle of hypotheses here. I claim nothing more for what I'm doing, that it is a hypothesis to be tested against future evidence. And I think it's important to realize that the archaeological narrative about prehistory is also a hypothesis, which will change as time goes on.
Right. Sacsayhuaman and Rapa Nui, the walls there, I mean, what's your best guess on how those were actually constructed? I know that between the extreme heat theory, and then there's this theory about potentially acid being used on them, and then there's geopolymer, which is probably the least likely. But what are your thoughts?
In season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, we have an indigenous guest on the show at Sacsayhuaman, and his name is Jesus Gamarra. I've been privileged to know Jesus for more than 20 years, and he is himself a descendant of the Incas, and he does not accept that these massive walls of Sacsayhuaman were the work of the Incas, which is what the Spanish tell us. He is convinced that the Incas were latecomers, and that they highly respected and venerated these more ancient monuments, and that they built around them, they built on top of them, they honored them, they respected them, but they couldn't do what those ancestor people had done.
Now, the Spanish never saw the Inca building any of those walls.
None whatsoever. And where we have definite Inca stonework, it is of a completely different nature from the walls of Sacsayhuaman and some of the walls in Cusco itself. And you can see in the same bit of Cusco, you can see the very ancient, incredibly precise megalithic stonework like that at Sacsayhuaman, and just beside it or above it, much inferior architecture, which appears to have been the work of the Incas. Now, if I were saying this, if I were saying this is my theory, I would be immediately accused of racism and white supremacism. But the fact is, the person who's saying it, Jesus Gamarra, is indigenous and is himself a descendant of the Incas. He's spent his whole life studying this matter, and he's convinced that we're looking not at one epoch of construction, but at least 3 different epochs of construction. And he does believe that in those incredible, massive megalithic stones, sort of 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle that make up the walls of Sacsayhuaman and other sites in that area, that we are looking at a lost technology, and that lost technology involved the softening of stone. There are ancient traditions in South America about certain plants being used to soften stone. And we know that stone can be softened with heat as well. What Jesus is pointing to is the evidence of vitrification on these stones, where the stone has been turned to glass, effectively with a glassy sheen across large areas. And his view is that this was caused by heat treatment of those stones, which softened them enough to make them moldable, so that we could get these incredibly precise connections between different blocks, one flowing into the other, almost indeed as though they've been melted together.
There's an incredible theory about acids that were used to soften the stones, and I saw it from a YouTuber named Ancient Architects, and he put out a video about 5 years ago. It has 5 million views, and is
that Matt Simpson?
Yes. Yeah. So I found that one fascinating, and it really, I mean, for me, the just of course for everybody, how incredibly tightly they fit together, how how they pillow out almost as if the weight of the next one had expanded something, and the fact that we do see these not only on Easter Island, but we see them in Peru, we see them in a lot of different places.
We see them in Turkey too.
And exactly, right. A very compelling evidence of potentially a global set of people that had access to this technology of call it technology, but of acid or whatever it was, that they were shipping around to different places around the world to be able to create some of these megalithic stonework.
And indeed, one of our archaeologist guests in Ancient Apocalypse is quite frank in saying, at Sacsayhuaman, we're looking at a lost technology. And I'm glad that there are archaeologists who are willing to stand up and say that, rather than being terrified of being mobbed by skeptical archaeologists who don't want to believe anything except what they themselves believe.
Yeah. In terms of the geoglyphs that we see in South America now that are being uncovered by the clearing of the rainforest, and there's some good images. So it's almost like these little ditches that you see.
Not little.
Not little, right?
They're the depth of a man of full height standing.
Okay.
And they're hundreds of meters across and hundreds of meters in both directions. These are huge things.
Yeah.
What they are, they're earthworks. And this is because in large parts of the Amazon, you are not going to find any stone that you can make megaliths with. But there's a very interesting parallel, particularly if you look at the circular versions of these, with like that one, for example, which are called henges in Europe. I mean, everybody's heard of Stonehenge. Well, the stones are what everybody sees, the upright standing stones. But the henge is the earthwork. One of the big ones near where I live in the southwest of England is called Avebury. And it's got this just huge henge earthwork, circular in form.
I talked to Ralph Ellis about it. Phenomenal.
It's a phenomenal
interesting,
place. And essentially, there's Avebury. Essentially, the earthwork is very similar to what we're seeing in South America. And again, I know because the eye of Sauron is constantly upon me, I know I need to make this clear right now. I am not saying that the idea of creating geometrical earthworks came to South America from Europe. And I'm not saying that it came to Europe from South America. I'm saying that both places shared a legacy from an earlier lost civilization. And that legacy involves the creation of massive geometrical earthworks. And where stone is available, the placing within those earthworks of gigantic megaliths, standing stones. There is one case, Rego Grande, in the northern part of Brazil, where an earthwork does actually have standing stones, and it is referred to as the Stonehenge of the Amazon, actually. But in most cases, they didn't have the natural stone to work with, but they did create the henges. And then when you look at the henges, you find that they're very geometrical, and particularly the rectangular and square ones are extremely precise. So they tell us a number of things. They tell us that whoever made these things were excellent geometers. And they tell us that they were able to envisage there's Rego Grande, that they were able to, which by the way has a solstitial alignment, just like Stonehenge in the UK, that they were able to envisage this huge thing on the ground that they were creating, which really can only be seen properly from the air. That's why you only see proper photographs of these as aerial photographs, because you can't really make out what you're dealing with on the ground.
And they're making them in the jungle?
Well, this is a question.
Yeah.
Had they cleared part of the jungle at that point? Almost certainly they did at that point to make the earthworks. And of course, the story of the Amazon rainforest itself is a complicated story. I'm of the view, which is increasingly shared by many archaeologists, that the Amazon is largely a man-made garden.
Right.
That human beings created the Amazon.
Right.
It probably wasn't a huge rainforest in the depths of the Ice Age, maybe more like an open savanna. But as climate changed and it became a sort of environment that could host a rainforest, the trees began to grow there. And then human beings began to select particular trees, which provided food. The Brazil nut tree is the best example. And then we find that actually those food-producing trees, although they may constitute only 1% of the species in the Amazon actually contribute 50% of the trees that are growing in the Amazon. There are many other species as well that aren't useful to humans that are growing in the Amazon, but these ones, the ones that are what they call hyperdominant, are all food-producing trees that are useful to humans. So that speaks to humans manipulating and managing this environment.
Over thousands of years.
Right. And during that time, creating structures that until very recently nobody believed that Amazonian peoples were capable of producing. And the fascinating thing now that we have this great technology called LIDAR, which can show you structures on the ground beneath the canopy of the Amazon rainforest without damaging the canopy at all, can see right through the canopy and can see the standout features on the ground. Now that that's been discovered, and again, we go into this with the team who are working in Acre State in Brazil, it's possible to detect as yet undiscovered geoglyphs in the Amazon. And even while we were there working with them, just over a period of a few days, they discovered more geoglyphs. Within hundreds of meters of ones that have been exposed, where you come to the edge of the rainforest, you go over the edge of the rainforest into the rainforest itself, look down with LIDAR, and you're finding hundreds more of these incredible structures. And Marty and I'll say you are of the view that the Amazon probably contains tens of thousands of these things. And in Acre State alone, there may be several thousand of them. So, and this is, again, a work in progress. This is something that's just starting. Once the investigation goes further, we now know that there really are intriguing mysteries of the human past in the Amazon. And I would love to see a full-scale LIDAR survey of the whole Amazon.
Yeah.
Where LIDAR has been done, it's revealed the geoglyphs, it's revealed the presence of cities. Much more needs to be done before we can say we've closed the books on the story we tell about the past.
Right. So take me back to whatever 15,000 years ago during the Ice Age, and this would have been cleared out. Potentially, the trees would have not been there yet, and so you're talking about like a savanna, like a plain,
more like a savanna.
Yeah. And so what would have and they're creating these in addition to the geoglyphs, they're creating roads to connect to and so
perfectly straight, running for 100 kilometers at a time.
I didn't realize hunter-gatherers created roads.
Well, that's right, and this is one of the points that Marty makes in our series, is that if you're a hunter-forager, a hunter-gatherer population, you don't need roads. You might be able to make them, but you don't really need them because they're not relevant to your lifestyle. But if you have a much larger population of settled peoples, then roads become useful, and it's the presence of these long roads connecting cities and connecting these earthworks too that is very puzzling. So I think we're looking at a new epoch of exploration in the Amazon. There's always been suspicion that the Amazon held something special.
Right.
But anybody who voiced that suspicion was treated as a member of the lunatic fringe.
Of course.
Well, now LIDAR is proving that's not lunatic fringe at all.
Right.
The Amazon is the heart of a gigantic mystery. And if we really want to know about our past, it's one of the places on the planet that we need to investigate much more thoroughly than we have done so far.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, the other interesting thing about it is the terra preta, the soil that we find in those areas.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in general, what I would refer to as Amazonian science, again, emerging out of shamanism, and we pay special attention to this. Terra preta is a man-made soil. By and large, rainforest soils are not particularly fertile. That's one of the reasons why it's foolish to build farms on rainforest soils, because such fertility as they have is maintained by the forest itself, by the constant fall of leaves, refreshing the ground underneath. But it's not great land for agriculture. Human beings solved that problem in the Amazon thousands of years ago. The earliest example that's so far been found is about 7,000 or 8,000 years old. But I'm saying so far been found quite deliberately because hardly any of the Amazon has really been looked at properly at all.
So you're saying when we dig down, we can see that the terra preta goes down to 7,000 to 8,000 years ago?
Yes, that's the oldest example so far recognized by archaeology. I believe they're going to find much, much older examples. And this is a man-made soil which almost miraculously rebuilds its own fertility. It's full of bacteria. And it has remained fertile. Even those 7,000 or 8,000 year old bits of it are still fertile today. And settlers in the Amazon, if they're not going to slash and burn the forest and they're looking for a place to plant within the forest itself, they seek out these patches of terra preta. So it's in my mind, a highly scientific endeavor to have created this self-regenerating soil in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. And the other scientific endeavor is the fabulous knowledge that Amazonian cultures have of the plants and trees in the Amazon and what may be derived from them. And the two of the best examples are curare, which paralyzes the muscles in the body. Curare is a mixture of 11 different Amazonian plants. Curare played a very important role in the development of modern anesthesiology. Why was it invented in the Amazon? It was invented in the Amazon because at a certain point, for many of the hunter-forager peoples in the Amazon, monkeys were important for hunting. And if you see a monkey that you would like to eat, and it's 250 feet or 200 feet above you on a very tall tree, you may be able to hit it with your arrow. But if that arrow is not tipped with curare, the last thing that monkey's going to do is wrap its tail around the branch of the tree, and it's not going to fall to the ground. And then you've got a major mission to get it down if you want it for dinner. Mm-hmm. Well, what curare does by causing all the muscles in the body to relax is that the prey animal cannot cling on after death to that tree. It does fall to the ground. Now, the point is 11 different plants are used in curare. None of them have that effect on their own. They all have to be combined in order to get the effect that curare produces. That speaks to God knows how long of experimentation with plants to get the result that you want to achieve. It's not something you just wake up one morning and create. Right. This is the result of a long scientific investigation that we're seeing in the Amazon, as I believe is the brew known as ayahuasca, which has become world famous in the last 20 years for its sometimes miraculous healing properties and for many other aspects of it as well. And ayahuasca consists of two ingredients, leaves and a vine called the ayahuasca vine. There are two sources for the leaves. One is a plant that they call chacruna in the Amazon, Psychotria viridis, which contains high quantities of dimethyltryptamine, DMT, arguably the most powerful psychedelic known to science. Another source of DMT are the leaves of a vine that they call chaliponga in the Amazon. And in both cases, the leaves on their own, cooked up into a tea, will not give you any kind of DMT trip. Mm-hmm. You will have no experience whatsoever because of the enzyme monoamine oxidase in the gut that destroys DMT on contact. So DMT is not orally accessible, and those leaves on their own will do nothing for you. You need another ingredient that shuts down that monoamine oxidase in the gut to allow the DMT to be absorbed orally. And that's what the ayahuasca vine is providing. It contains monoamine oxidase inhibitors. And again, to me, out of the thousands of different species of plants and trees in the Amazon, to find just three, that two producing the leaves, one, the vine being common to both, that can result in this extraordinary brew that we call ayahuasca, which means the vine of souls, or the vine of the dead, actually in the Quechua language of the Incas. That's the word that has become widely disseminated around the world. But there are many other names for ayahuasca in the Amazon, and the one that is produced from the ayahuasca vine and the chaliponga vine leaves is known as yahe in the Amazon. And we worked with a shaman during the filming of season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse. We do not show me actually drinking ayahuasca in that show. I think it was felt that perhaps would be sending the wrong kind of message. But after we'd finished the filming, I and Luis Eduardo Luna, who's a leading specialist in ayahuasca, who I've known for decades, we did have a yahe session with Francisco Montes Shuna, the shaman, and I have to say it was one of the most powerful sessions that I've ever had in my life. I've worked a lot with ayahuasca. I've probably had somewhere in the region of 70 to 80 ayahuasca experiences, and a lot of critics say, "Oh, that proves you're addicted to ayahuasca." Well, no, it doesn't actually. So I have to really brace myself for every return to the ayahuasca
critics.
experience.
No,
Yeah.
it's been scientifically proven that it's not.
Well, it's definitely
addictive.
not addictive.
Right.
Actually, you have to overcome your basic instinct, which is, I don't want to drink this because it's going to make me vomit. It's going to give me diarrhea.
Right.
And I may have some very unpleasant experiences under the influence of it. The reason that I've continued to drink ayahuasca is because I believe, and this will sound mystical to rational empiricists, I believe that ayahuasca has lessons to teach me. And it still does. It began to teach me about myself from the first time I experienced ayahuasca in 2003. And it takes a long time to get rid of a lifetime of bad habits. But ayahuasca has shown me the bad habits. It's shown me a particular problem I have with anger, shown me the impact of that anger on others, and has basically said to me, you need to fix this if you're going to live a worthwhile life. And so just as the ancient peoples of the Amazon call ayahuasca a teacher, I believe we are dealing with a teacher here. And it's very odd that a combination of two plants can personify as some kind of entity, some kind of spirit. Many cultures in the Amazon see the spirit as female. A few of them see the spirit as male. Mostly in the West, where people have drunk ayahuasca, they see the spirit of ayahuasca as female. She may appear in the form of a human woman. I mean, literally appear in your visions. She may appear as a jaguar. She has a number of a great serpent is one of her most common manifestations. A serpent that is communicating with you intelligently and looking at the way you've lived your life and asking you to do better. There's a very strong moral dimension to the ayahuasca teachings. But the most surprising of all is this sense of being plunged into a seamlessly convincing parallel universe, which is filled with sentient entities who are not physical in form, but nevertheless are able to communicate with you and you with them at the level of consciousness. And then we are confronted by a big mystery with this. What are these? Why do human beings all around the world encounter the same entities and report the same experiences? What is actually going on here? Can it just be attributed to shared human neurology? Or is it possible that what ayahuasca is doing is allowing us access to levels of reality that we normally don't have access to? And that is becoming more and more the view even of mainstream science. And I'd like to pay tribute particularly to the... As I mentioned, dimethyltryptamine is what you would call the active ingredient of the ayahuasca brew. And as I mentioned, dimethyltryptamine is not accessible orally unless it's mixed with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor like
the vine.
The vine.
Yeah.
But there is another way that you can get DMT straight into the bloodstream. And and then it crosses the blood-brain barrier. And you don't have to swallow it. You can feed it intravenously by a drip. This is happening at Imperial College in London, and it's happening at the University of California at San Diego as well. Big new experiments are being done where they are able to keep people in the peak DMT state for an hour or more. Normally, DMT, if smoked or vaped, 10 minutes. 10 minutes at the most. But in the case of these experiments that are being done at Imperial and at UCSD, they are keeping volunteers under for an hour. And while they're under the influence, they are also putting them in MRI scanners. And they're constantly interviewing them and asking, what are you seeing? And again, these reports come up from volunteers who haven't compared notes that they are encountering sentient entities who have teachings to give them about themselves. It's extremely mysterious. There's now the volunteers in the UK have formed a group now called Sentient Others, and they're sharing now their experiences. And I think we're looking at the beginning of a huge mystery that is about to be unfolded, which challenges all ideas about the nature of reality that we presently have in our society. And that's a good thing. We need to be shaken up. And one of the great things that the ayahuasca brew does, it shakes you up as an individual. That's why Not only ayahuasca, but some of the other psychedelics as well. Like, for example, psilocybin. We now know from modern scientific research that a heroic dose of psilocybin, a big dose of psilocybin, can break decades of depression. A person who's been sunk in depression so deep that they can hardly communicate, it's gone.
Right.
Just wiped away. And what's happened is that those obsessive thoughts constantly dwelling on the misery of your own condition that have dominated your mind for so long, the psychedelic experience has just broken that cycle completely,
right,
and set people free.
And addiction, all types of
very
addiction.
much so,
Yep.
very much so.
PTSD.
Addiction to the opiates, addiction to cocaine, these again are being effectively treated with ayahuasca and with other psychedelics today. So there's many examples. PTSD is another. Yep. PTSD is ruining the lives of people who've been through traumatic experience, right, particularly veterans who've been in places like Iraq or Afghanistan and have found themselves in horrific situations and who are suffering from ongoing trauma. The psychedelics, properly administered in the right setting, can break them out of PTSD and put them back on the road to a complete recovery. So we are seeing an awakening taking place even in the scientific world, where it's beginning to recognize that these substances that have for so long been demonized in a kind of propagandistic war, going back, I think, to the time of Nixon, the so-called war on drugs, that this demonization was all propaganda, and that there's no truth to it, and that actually these substances are very unlikely to cause any harm. I'm not saying they won't cause that they cause no harm. One of the things to be aware of with the psychedelics, with psilocybin, with ayahuasca, with LSD, they don't cause psychosis, but what they may do is reveal psychosis. If the individual is already suffering from a psychosis, if this is a schizophrenic person and it's not manifested too visibly in his or her behavior up to now, ayahuasca can reveal it and make it much, 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 much worse. So it's important to have a sense of who you are when you go into an ayahuasca session. And if you've had schizophrenic type experiences, you've been hearing voices for a decade beforehand, I wouldn't recommend ayahuasca or any psychedelic as the way to go. But for most people who don't have those psychotic symptoms, ayahuasca or the other psychedelics are not going to make them psychotic.
Right.
But nevertheless, there is that risk. So people must be aware of their own mental state when they opt to have experiences with psychedelics.
Yeah, it wasn't just the war on drugs; it was also the war on medicine.
Yeah, very much so.
It didn't distinguish between the fact that there are healing properties in plant and fungal medicine.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And you know, it's had a most unfortunate effect of delaying research into these intriguing substances, which are now proved to have profound therapeutic value, and which may, in the future, and already proving to be excellent tools for the investigation of the mystery of consciousness, what consciousness actually is, and are leading people who are studying these matters to wonder, is the old paradigm that consciousness is simply generated by the brain, that the brain is some sort of factory that makes consciousness, is that correct? Or could the brain be more like a television set that is receiving a signal and manifesting that signal? The whole new ideas about the nature of consciousness are beginning to emerge, and psychedelics are the best way to test and explore those ideas because they're very effective and they're very quick. There are other ways to get into deeply altered states of consciousness, but not everybody wants to starve themselves for a month. Fasting, you can get into a deeply altered state of consciousness. The Sundance, the Native American Sundance, that's another way without substances to get into a deeply altered state of consciousness. At the end of the day, it's the altered state of consciousness that matters, that knocks us out of the alert problem-solving state that our society so highly values and allows us to experience other states and other dimensions and levels of consciousness. There are other ways to get into it without psychedelics, but psychedelics are the most efficient way to get into that state.
Hey, Ryan, can you pull up the message from Stefan that I asked you to? This is really interesting, Graham, and I want to get your take on this, and it's directly in line with what we're talking about. Okay, so Schumann resonances, are you familiar?
Not very.
I wasn't either. And so I just had this episode with this guy, Stefan Burns. He's a space weather guy, but he's brilliant. He's one of the most intelligent people that I've ever spoken to. He's got a phenomenal YouTube channel. And his Schumann resonances are specific extreme low frequencies of light, 8, 14, 20, blah, blah hertz. And they exist at naturally higher amplitudes. Let me get to the point, basically.
Yeah.
The Schumann resonances are essentially waves of light that get trapped within the Earth. So they're bouncing between the Earth's surface and the magnetosphere, and they bounce back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and they never go away. And the wavelength of one of these is the same circumference is the same length as the circumference of the Earth.
How interesting!
How interesting, right? And so essentially, it's just light that is trapped within the Earth, and light, of course, carries information on it. And so the theory is from Stefan that we talked about a couple of episodes ago, was that this could be an explanation for how if you are in an altered state of consciousness, for example, that you would be able to pick up information, that you could become an antenna for information that's traveling all around the world, that some people might naturally be able to pick it up anyway, because your temporal lobes are connected to this 8 hertz frequency. And it could explain, in part, how pyramids might pop up around the world at the same time. It could explain collective consciousness to a certain degree, but it can also, very much from a scientific standpoint, explain this antenna, this beacon of information that people sometimes feel when they're on psychedelics.
And again, that's supporting the previously ignored idea that consciousness could be received by the brain, rather than generated by the brain. While we're talking about the circumference of the Earth, I'll just jump to another element of this. Again, archaeologists don't like it. Although even Flint Dibble in our debate admitted that it is a fact, that if you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, which is one of those precessional numbers, it's 72 times 600, you get the polar radius of the Earth. And if you measure the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. And for archaeologists to believe that this is just a coincidence strikes me as actually lunatic, particularly when we have a monument that itself can alter consciousness. If you have the opportunity, as I have done, to have the Great Pyramid to yourself, to be alone in there, or in my case, with Santha in the Great Pyramid, total silence, you'll find that your consciousness is directly affected by it. Well, we have a monument there that is placed on a very key location on the Earth's surface. It's pretty much exactly on latitude 30, which is 1/3 of the way between the North Pole and the equator. Again, archaeologists say coincidence. I say no. I say knowledge of the Earth. That was a deliberate latitude that was chosen. It also happens to cross the largest amount of land on the Earth's circumference, that same latitude line. In addition, the Great Pyramid is almost perfectly, the precision is uncanny, aligned to true astronomical north, south, east, and west. So whatever else the Great Pyramid is, it is certainly plunged into, keyed into the Earth itself. It's a monument that speaks to the Earth. And then how clever to encode within it the dimensions of the Earth, the polar radius and the equatorial circumference, and to do so on a scale that is defined by a key motion of the Earth itself, which is precession. For all that to be a coincidence seems to me crazy. This is a result of purposeful planning. To come back to the theme that we're discussing at the moment of psychedelics, experiences with psychedelics in deep altered states of consciousness, the setting is very important. The place where you experience the psychedelic is extremely important. Nobody should take these substances recreationally. I'm not here to tell other people what to do, but my advice would be these substances are for deep personal exploration, and they're not to be taken just for some kind of high.
Right.
And actually, they're going to put you through an ordeal if you do that. So the setting is important, and the intention within which you go into the session is also important. And I do think the Great Pyramid provides an extraordinary setting for experiences in altered states of consciousness. And I do think that was one of the things it was used for. What it was not used for was as the tomb of a particular pharaoh, a tomb and a tomb only, supposedly of the pharaoh Khufu. I don't buy that. I don't see any evidence that it was a tomb at all. It's set up in some. It has a sarcophagus in it, but let's consider the other options for that. That a person in a deeply altered state of consciousness is placed in that sarcophagus to enter a parallel realm and to come back with knowledge from it. That is perfectly possible, and that's what happens in the most powerful psychedelic journeys. If your setting is right. If you were able, and I've not done so, if you were able to undertake that experience in the so-called King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, I bet it would magnify the experience 1,000-fold. So, we don't understand what the Great Pyramid is. There's 100 pyramids in Egypt. Not a single pharaonic burial has ever been found in any of them. There were certainly no burials inside the Great Pyramid when Caliph Mamun broke it open in the 9th century. Why should we accept that it's a tomb? It's a place to explore and examine the mysteries of life and death and the mystery of being a human on this planet.
Yeah, let's stick on Egypt if we could for a second. And I want to. One of the coolest things that from your personal journey in life is scaling the Great Pyramid, of course, and getting to the top of it multiple times, and seeing the name of your grandfather up at the top. That's incredible.
It was amazing, and it tied in with his diary, which I was able to gain access to, and his autobiography, which never was published, but which I still have in my office back in the UK. He talks about his climb of the Great Pyramid. He doesn't talk a lot about it. He just says, climb Great Pyramid today. But there it is, and there's his name. He was there in 1916 as a chaplain with British forces. My grandfather was brought up in a very, very working class community in Wales. He carried heavy iron plates in a foundry, but he was actually discovered by he was a staunch Christian from his early life. He was discovered by some American missionaries who sent him to Bible college in San Francisco. And then he began to travel around the world. He spent 8 years in what was then Persia, which is now Iran, trying to convert people to Christianity. He had absolutely zero success in doing that. And the result of that was my father was born in Resht, in what was then Persia. So I seem to have this sort of background of a family that have traveled the world. And at the age of 4, my dad and mum took me to South India, and I spent 4 years living in South India. So it touched a particular nerve to see my grandfather's name at the top of the Great Pyramid, and to feel that in some way, somehow, I'm part of a lineage that's always been a bit out on the edge.
That's so cool.
And exploring mysteries.
Yeah. And you had no expectation of seeing his name?
None whatsoever. I had no idea.
Yeah.
At that point, I didn't even know that he'd been in Egypt during the First World War.
That's incredible.
I learned about it afterwards.
Yeah. So sticking on Egypt for a second, we've got these vases, and I wanted to get your thoughts on those if we could.
Fabulous collection that you have here.
Thank you. Yeah, one of your friends recently spoke with one of my friends, and that would be when Flint Dibble went on the Danny Jones show.
Oh, yeah.
And Danny's a good friend of mine. And his explanation for how these were hollowed out was that you had a stick. And you would take a rock, and you would put the rock and attach it to the stick, and then just twist it with your hands like that. There's a meme of him twisting.
Might even work if you had 10,000 years to do it, But to make it to do that within a human lifetime, I'm afraid that's not a satisfactory explanation at all. I mean, look at this. This is diorite, right?
It is.
Incredibly hard stone.
Yeah.
Look at the perfection with which it is made, and then look inside. This bit is actually, you can go inside. It's hollowed out inside with perfect regularity.
Yep.
And how that was done with twirling a stick beats me, and it beats anybody who's seriously looked at these objects. Again, we're dealing with some kind of technology that we do not understand. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was a very high-tech, machine-age technology, but it means that we're looking at the end results of a process that we cannot replicate and that we have not got to grips with yet. And that is fascinating. I first, it's not a subject that I've followed up in recent years, partly because I've been out of Egypt for quite a while. I will be spending a lot more time in Egypt in the coming year. But I've been traveling elsewhere and exploring other mysteries. But I first became interested in these vases in Egypt way back in 1992 or 1993 when I was first researching fingerprints of the gods. That's the time I met Chris Dunn. Have you had Chris on your show?
I'm a good friend. Yeah, he was my second guest, actually.
Yeah, and Chris speaks authoritatively about this evidence of some kind of ancient technology that we see in these. And I was looking at vases in what was then the Cairo Museum, which have very narrow necks and then open out into this large base. And again, how that was done with the technology that is attributed to the ancient Egyptians, I just can't get it, and nor can Chris, and nor can anybody else who looks at this seriously. Chris is also focused on the so-called bull sarcophagi at Saqqara, in just a bit south of Giza. And again, carved out of diorite, huge things, very, very precise in every dimension. So I do think we are holding evidence of a lost technology that we don't understand, and that we try to explain away with easy solutions to what is in fact a very complicated, very difficult problem. Yes, I wasn't joking when I said if you had your stick and your stone on the end of it, maybe in 10,000 years you could do this.
Maybe.
But the idea of somebody sitting there for 10,000 years, since our lifespan tends to be 70 or 80 or 90 years, is most improbable.
Yeah. But if you see the CT scans on these and you see the wall thickness that's just equal on one side to the other, to anywhere that you would pick on the same latitude, it's equal. It just doesn't, you just can't get there with primitive hand tools. And
you can't.
We're missing something.
Yeah, we're definitely missing something. And that's what drives me. It's that sense of curiosity about the past. It's the ancient knowledge of astronomy. It's the ancient knowledge of longitude. It's the ancient exploration of the world, which is not accounted for in the mainstream archaeological narrative. These are the curiosities that draw me, that trigger my curiosity and make me want to understand the past better. And when I start doing that, I include amongst them the anomalies of these stone vases, and the evidence is becoming more and more clear that we have a real anomaly here, something that is not explained by archaeologists, and when they try to explain it, they do so in ridiculous ways, which actually ultimately are going to be very harmful to archaeology, because anybody with half a brain can see that this is not the result of a twirling stick.
Right. Yeah. No, it's the same thing as when they use lies in order to attempt to prove a point. I mean, that's not good for archaeology.
Very bad for archaeology.
Very bad. Very
bad. Nobody likes to be told what to think.
Right.
To be told that we're dealing with an expert in the past, and that the views of that expert are correct, and that anybody who dares challenge them is to be destroyed. This is a real problem. It is a return to the Inquisition of the Middle Ages, and I will go further and say that I think that it's not all archaeologists, and I want to make this clear. I know many archaeologists who are open-minded, and many archaeologists who, just won't turn me away from an archaeological site. They won't lock that site to me. And I've learned a lot from them, and archaeologists are doing fantastic work, but we need another approach as well to bring to the table and to explore and understand the past. Yeah. The point I want to make is that what I'm seeing in this minority of archaeologists, as I say, there are many good archaeologists who I hugely respect. What we're seeing in this vocal minority of archaeologists who want to so-called debunk, who want to pour scorn on, who want to destroy any idea that doesn't coincide with their own. Because they're archaeologists, because they're doctor this or professor that at a university, and the status that comes with that gives them power. And I think what we're looking at is an abuse of power by archaeologists. I think they're abusing their power by using their positions to shut down alternative point of view. alternative points of view. And I think it's high time that the archaeological institution as a whole stopped circling the wagons around these people who want to shut down alternative inquiry and realize that we can be in a mutual endeavor here, that it doesn't need to be hostile on both sides. Yeah, I say some harsh things about archaeologists, but I'm human, and archaeologists have been saying harsh things about me for 30 years. At a certain point, you begin to want to fight back. And fighting is not a constructive way to move forward. It's much better to find common ground and see what we can all learn from each other. I certainly learn a lot from archaeology. I wish archaeologists were willing. I'm not saying to learn from me. I don't want them to accept my ideas. I'm not seeking their approval, but just be open-minded enough to have a reasonable discussion, which doesn't involve smearing the other party with epithets like racist or white supremacist or other such nonsense.
That's crazy. It's crazy. Do you think archaeology is a science?
No.
Why do we call it a science?
Archaeologists want it to be a science.
Right.
They're desperate to regard themselves as true scientists. But no, archaeology is a much more interpretive discipline about the past, and it's not a hard science like mathematics or physics. If it's a science, it's a very soft science, and the amount of experimentation that you can do to test hypotheses is very, very small. And I think this is part of the problem. That archaeologists want to look like these rigorous, rational scientists. They're desperate to distance themselves from any kind of superstition. That's one of the reasons why they don't like the fact that there are 200 myths, so-called myths, about a global flood around the world. Very often a flood that destroyed a former civilization. They don't want to be, they see that as kind of superstition and storytelling. They don't want to be associated with, that's too soft for them. They want stuff that they can weigh, measure, and count. Well, great. Let's weigh, measure, and count. But let's take account of all the other messages that are sent to us by the past as well. And those are encoded very strongly in myths and traditions from all around the world.
A lot of times when people attack people, it's because they're angry about their own self, what's happening within the inside. And when you think about archaeology and science and how they label people pseudoscientists, and they throw that name around, is it really because they kind of realize that they're not really scientists themselves?
Yeah, I think they're projecting their own insecurity in some way. I'll take this opportunity to say that while Wikipedia is useful, it is a very biased tool. It's a very biased. Encyclopedias are supposed to objectively present the facts. They're not supposed to manifest the points of view of particular interest groups. And I've noticed that those of us who are thinking in alternative ways about the past, or indeed in alternative ways about mysteries like the mystery of consciousness. Rupert Sheldrake, for example, is a true scientist, but he's spent his life studying mysteries like telepathy and telekinesis. He gets all kinds of accusations for that, and he is referred to as a pseudoscientist. And I'm referred to on my Wikipedia page as somebody who's spreading pseudoscientific ideas. That is an opinion. That is an opinion. That should not be in an encyclopedia. That is there because actually the same group of archaeologists who have been so vigorously attacking my work are precisely the people who control my Wikipedia page.
Right.
You can try to, yes, Hoops is key in anything to do with so-called pseudo-archaeology. He's all over Wikipedia in that respect. He's even boasted about that.
Right.
They're introducing
this is your
a speculative term, pseudoscientific theories. Now, you see, for people who know my work, they know that's not what I am. But for somebody who's heard about my work, perhaps heard my name for the first time, they're a bit curious. The first place that when they search Graham Hancock on Google, the first hit they're going to get is to Wikipedia. And Wikipedia is going to say, this guy is a pseudoscientist, which is a very pejorative, very negative term. And that may turn many people off. And that's exactly the purpose of the Wikipedia page. It's designed effectively to cancel me by persuading other people not to take a look at anything that I've said or done. And if they did take a look at what I've said or done, they'd see that it's a result of 30 years of rigorous boots-on-the-ground work and thousands of pages of books with thousands of footnotes directing people to where I go. This is not pseudoscience. I don't claim it's science, but I don't need that label being applied to me, designed to switch me off, to turn people off my work right from the beginning without even looking at my work. Right. And furthermore, having no right to edit my Wikipedia page. My Wikipedia page, anybody who tries to edit it, they'll find they can't. If an edit is put in, it'll be removed very, very quickly because the page is controlled. And that's what it seems the archaeological establishment want the public to think about my work. Most of the rest of the content, I'm not going to pick any fight with that, but the use of this word pseudoscientist again and again is propaganda, and it's deliberately designed to shut me down. So I know that in my area, when I look at the Wikipedia pages of people like Rupert Sheldrake, of myself and of others working in alternative, Robert Beall, Robert Schoch, I see the same problem occurring, and I see that it's a definite part of the structure of Wikipedia is that it is used to promote the agenda of particular interest groups in a field that I know. I suspect in fields that I don't know, the same thing is also true.
Yeah.
That particular,
it's corrupt.
It's corrupt. It's a corrupt presence in the world today. And it's corrupt because it's presenting itself as objective and not driven by agendas, when in fact it is driven by agendas. And if it wants to say that it is driven by agendas, and we support particular agendas, and our encyclopedia expresses those agendas, if it says that openly, fair enough. But it presents itself as objective.
Yeah. Well, I think the good thing is that more and more people are taking Wikipedia less and less seriously.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Dan Richards from Dedunking has done some great work to expose a lot of that nonsense.
He has indeed. Yeah. He has indeed. And I think this is a good caution for anybody in any field. Don't rely on Wikipedia. It can be a useful first port of call. It can be a very useful place. It is anyway where Google will put you first of all.
Right.
But be very, very careful in swallowing everything that they say there, because what you're swallowing is propaganda.
Right. Well, let's look forward to the future maybe a bit as we close things out. So what can you tell us about Ancient Apocalypse 3, a potential for where that might be, or should we keep that?
Well, I just can't say whether that will happen or not. The decision making in the commissioning process in Netflix is not under my control. Netflix absolutely independent and makes up its own mind on what it does. And I'm very glad that they gave us a season 2. And perhaps that was because season 1 was so successful, and viewers all over the world watched that show, and it was one of the most successful documentary series that Netflix has ever made. And perhaps that was why season 2 got commissioned. I don't know whether season 3 is going to be commissioned or not. It might be that Netflix will wash their hands of the matter at this point and just leave us with 2 seasons. Or they might decide to continue. I hope they decide to continue, but I don't know that at the moment. If there is an option for a season 3, I'd like to focus it on Egypt. But that, again, would be in discussion with Netflix as to where they would like to go next. There's many other issues, mysteries in the past that I would like to explore around the world. But I regard myself as blessed and fortunate to have had the opportunity to reach a worldwide audience through the Netflix platform. And I'm grateful for the 2 seasons that I've had. And I hope I get a 3rd season. And I hope I can make it in Egypt. But that's entirely in the hands of Netflix. And I won't know for some time.
Got to assume if you got a 2nd season, you're going to get a 3rd season. There was so much pushback and nonsense, after that 1st season. And this one it's hard to really argue or think about too much, that's super controversial that you've said. You're just bringing up really incredible and logical questions about human history.
Thank you. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. But as I say, it's not under my control.
Yeah, fair.
So we'll see what happens. I've been very, very, very privileged to work with a fantastic team in the making of Ancient Apocalypse. And not many people necessarily know this, but most programming on Netflix is made by independent production companies. And in my case, the independent production company is ITN, Independent Television News in the UK. They have a production company called ITN Productions. It's they who first approached me. It's they who pitched the show to Netflix. And it's they who I've worked with most closely during the years of making Ancient Apocalypse. A fabulous director named Mark Tiley, a fabulous cameraman, a fabulous sound man. Great team, and we're all very, very, very close to each other, and we all respect each other's work. I'm not a natural team player. but this has taught me the value of teams. This has taught me that when you're working with people who you really trust and really respect, you can focus on your bit of the job, and you can absolutely trust them to focus on their bit. And they will trust you to focus on your bit, and the end result is just brilliant. So I'm much more in favor of teamwork after this experience than I used to be. Authors tend to be, lone wolves.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you've got a great partner there. You're not a complete lone wolf.
No, I'm very fortunate to have done all of these travels and all of these adventures with my wife Santha, who's a very gifted photographer. My gift is words. Santha's gift is images, and we make a great team. And we've traveled the world together. Every adventure, every one of those hundreds and hundreds, possibly more than 1,000 scuba dives all around the world, every climb of the Great Pyramid, and every ayahuasca experience as well. We've always shared those experiences together.
That's great. Yeah. That was the one thing that when I asked you to come on, and I didn't even know if I'd get a response. But your one condition was Santha comes with me, and there's no exceptions.
Yeah, we've made that a rule from the beginning of our working relationship that we will always work and travel together. We could have had the option of, going in different directions. Santha was a photographic stringer for Reuters in Ethiopia when I met her. She's been a photographer for long before me, but we decided to work together, and it's just we're a very natural team. And there's a lot of love between us, and it makes sometimes very tough and difficult journeys much more fun.
Yeah, that's great. Well, a couple of more questions, if that's okay. Yeah, just looking forward into the future. I want to get your thoughts on a couple of things, because I think the world is kind of interested to know. I'm certainly very interested to know your thoughts on a couple of things that maybe you don't talk about all that often. One is this concept of the magnetic poles and the potential for a magnetic pole excursion or flip or reversal. What are your thoughts there?
Well, it's happened before.
Yeah.
It can happen again.
I guess I mean soon.
Yeah. I may not be remembering correctly because I've not been focused on this issue for a long time, but I do think the last magnetic pole flip was around about 12,000 years ago, somewhere of that. Or I may be wrong about that.
It's deeper. Yeah, there was an excursion 42,000, and then there was a flip. I want to say 700,000. Okay. Yeah, but we're several hundred thousand years overdue.
Several 100,000 years overdue for a magnetic pole flip.
Correct.
Well, we have to ask ourselves, where does the magnetism of the Earth come from, and to what extent is it connected to the rotation of the Earth? Could a magnetic pole flip destabilize the Earth itself? Could it be the result of a destabilization of the Earth? We don't know this yet. It's not, as I say, it's not a matter that I've investigated particularly closely. Perhaps I should. Perhaps I should look into it in more depth. In the future. I mean, as anybody who uses a compass knows, magnetic north, even now, is not the same as true north. Right. It's about 11 degrees off true astronomical north.
Right. Yeah. It's an interesting one. I know there's a handful of different people out there that are talking about this, and there's one who's very alarmist and very nervous. I wouldn't say nervous. He's not a fearful person, but he thinks that it's very much imminent.
Right.
And the North Magnetic Pole is hauling ass right now for sure. It's moving right across. It's an interesting conversation.
Is there any evidence that those earlier magnetic pole flips were accompanied by some kind of geographical polar wandering?
That's a question I'm not completely sure of. Yeah.
We both need to dig into this further.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But it's a great, interesting topic.
It
for
certainly
sure.
is. It certainly is. Yeah.
What about the moon? Your thoughts on the moon?
Well, I know. Again, I'm handing my critics yet another stick to beat me with. But I have become aware of a cycle in my body that correlates with the cycles of the moon. And perhaps this isn't so surprising because we know that the female menstrual cycle is often coordinates with the moon in some ways. In my case, it's migraines. I get into peak migraine episodes in the days just before a full moon, and they ease off after the full moon. And I fully recognize this could be a correlation without any direct causative factor at all. It may not be that the moon is giving me migraines. It may be my body is giving me migraines, and my cycle is somehow correlated to the cycle of the moon. But I'm open to the idea it could be causative as well. But I know it's there. I know it's a real thing. I know that ancient cultures paid great attention to the moon. One of the areas that we were able to film in North America was Chaco Canyon. And in Chaco Canyon, you have, of course, all of the standard alignments that you find everywhere in the world, to the summer solstice, the winter solstice, the equinox sunrises and sunsets. But you also have alignments to lunar events, particularly the 18.6 cycle, which is the northern and southern standstill of the moon. It's quite an observational feat to pick that up. And there are alignments in Chaco that target that as well. So they were very interested in the moon. The moon does not rise in the same place through the course of a year, and it does not rise in the same place through a course of, this cycle is 18.6 years long. And yet there it is, expressed magnificently in the architecture of Chaco Canyon.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. What about, you've talked about humans as a species with amnesia, and you know, as a way to explain, you know, the what we've lost about our history.
Yeah.
But in terms of where we are now as a species, you know, and where we're going in the future, before I get to what gives you optimism, you know, what do you feel, what are you most concerned about for humanity today as a species?
Yes. When human beings were only armed with swords and spears, we weren't likely to wipe each other out. When we were only armed with machine guns and rifles and pistols, we weren't going to wipe each other out. But today, we have many nations in the world that have nuclear weapons. And when I look around the very low quality of leadership around the world, I see these powers, effectively the powers of a god. That's what a nuclear power is. It can destroy the whole of human civilization. But they have very low-level consciousness, these individuals, very low-level consciousness. And so I compare it to the powers of the gods in the hands of petulant teenagers who are angry with one another and seeking to pick a fight. This is a very dangerous situation that we have today. And the only solution to it is going to be an overall elevation in consciousness, that people have to become more aware of what is going on. And that we have to stop our leaders recklessly seeking wars and seeking to destroy one another, because sooner or later those wars will go non-conventional and they will go nuclear, and then our story is over. As far as I know, I talk about civilizations in the past, but as far as I know, we are the first human civilization that has the power to wipe ourselves out completely. We don't need some comet impact on the Earth. We don't need some massive solar outburst. We can do it ourselves. And what horror that would be, and what a shame that would be, if after all these years the universe has gifted us this beautiful, beautiful home to live on, planet Earth, and has gifted us the opportunity to grow and develop as beings on this Earth. What a pity if we wipe it all out because we've got the psychology of angry teenagers instead of the psychology of fully conscious, evolved adults, which is what is needed, and a fully conscious, involved adult leadership around the world. And when I say adult, I'm talking about the state of their consciousness, not their physical age. If we're going to continue as a species, that's what we need. And maybe we invest too much power in leaders, and maybe what's needed for the future is less leadership and more individual awakening. And that is actually where I hold my most optimistic and best hope for the future, is that there is a kind of war around consciousness going on in the world today, but there is evidence that more and more people are awakening to consciousness and are resisting the notion that big government has the right to control every aspect of our lives, and wish to take responsibility for their own actions. They don't want government to be the responsible, and we have personal responsibility for everything, and that includes the way our governments behave. And if they're allowed to behave that's because we've put them in a position where they can behave that way. So this rise in consciousness, and I do see it, particularly amongst younger people today, a growing awakening, a willingness to resist narratives that are forced upon them. That's, I think, the best hope for humanity.
Yeah, love it, love it. One last question.
Sure.
And it might be the most tricky one, and you can pass if you'd like, but my question for you is, what is God to Graham Hancock as you're today?
Yeah, well, a work in progress, as all human lives are. I was brought up in a Christian family. I was, eventually after we returned from India, I was sent to a boarding school, a Christian boarding school. It was a horrific experience. My first real act of rebellion was refusing to kneel down in the chapel during prayers. Something else. My mum and dad lost two of my siblings in India. In fact, I'm the only survivor of three siblings. One was born before me, and stillborn. Then I was born, and I'm still here. And then my sister Susan was born in South India. She lived for a year and died. And then my brother Jimmy was born in South India. He lived for a year and died. And we were living amongst a Christian community in South India, actually at the Christian Medical College in Vellore in Tamil Nadu. And amongst that community, there were people who went to my mum and told her that she is losing these children because she has committed a sin. She has committed some kind of sin, and this is God punishing her. And that was the moment that my mum went from being a staunch Christian to being an atheist, literally overnight. And I would say for quite a long period of my life, with my own rebellion against that kind of thing, I would have defined myself as an atheist. Now, what does an atheist mean? It means without God, somebody who does not believe in God. And to that extent, perhaps I'm still an atheist because I don't believe in a single individual God figure. I think that's a fairy tale. I don't believe that at all. But I do believe in a universe imbued with mystery. I do think that spirit is the essence of human beings, not our physical bodies. I do think there's far more beyond this life. We're part of a huge project. It's not an accident that consciousness has had the opportunity to grow on this planet. And we have to fulfill that obligation. So I think that I would define myself as a spiritual person, but not as a religious person. Because what is religion apart from a series of dogmas that we are taught to accept as true? And that in past ages, you could be burnt at the stake if you disagreed with it. Well, not burnt at the stake today, but it's still very controlling. This is the truth. This is the narrative. You must believe this. That has been very harmful and has prevented individuals from developing their own sense of spirituality. So I think we are going to see a change in this respect, and that people in the future are going to be embracing spirituality more. And when I say spirituality, I just mean that there is much more to reality than our physical selves, than our physical bodies, and that we need to free ourselves from the dogmas of the past if we're ever to experience that directly. And I think, quite successfully freed myself from religious dogma. It has no place in my life. It doesn't mean that I don't regard books like the Bible as extremely interesting and full of very, very useful and important material. But personally speaking, I don't believe in that there's one sort of father figure God who has made all of this. I think it's much more complicated than that. Nevertheless, the creation of life is a fascinating mystery. How life suddenly appeared on this planet, first in the form of bacteria containing the DNA, RNA system that is still fundamental to life on Earth. If there were such a thing as a God, that entity would have been wise, would not have been able, certainly would have been wise not to create human beings just suddenly out of nothing. We live on a planet, and the planet has its own environment, and we have to evolve to work within that environment. But what we see from the first bacterial life about 3.9 billion years ago is a process where it's become more and more and more and more complex. It's called evolution. So bottom line, I know that many who are staunch believers in the Abrahamic God are opposed to the notion of evolution. But if there were such a thing as a God, that entity would use evolution as a process in his or her creation. Because you can't control every factor in the universe. The Earth is constantly subject to sudden changes, and life has to be able to bounce back. And The best example of that is the extinction of the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. Life bounced back. That was when mammals came into our own. The first mammals, they were going nowhere 66 million years ago. I mean, how could they compete with dinosaurs? But they very rapidly, after the dinosaurs were gone, they very rapidly began to fill every niche across this planet. And that would not have happened if the dinosaurs had not been made extinct, and if there were not such a thing as evolution. So I don't see evolution as contradicting the idea of a deity at all. But personally, I don't think one deity is the answer. I think it's actually much bigger, much more mysterious, much deeper, much more problematic than that.
Brilliant. I really appreciate that response and going so deep into that. Yeah, fascinating stuff. Graham, I am eternally grateful to you for coming on the show. It has been a fascinating conversation. I just feel I'm like in a dream here. I've been watching you and your work for so long, and it's just to finally get together with you and chat has just been amazing. And,
Thank you.
And both you and Santha are just such wonderful people.
That's very sweet of you, man. Thank you.
So thank you for coming on.
And can I say the same for you and Crystal too? We've really enjoyed meeting you both, and we hope that this connection will continue in the future.
As do we.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you, Graham.
Cheers.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.